Hola y buenos días. Yo soy el señor Morris, maestro de español. ¿Cómo están todos? Today, we'll review the Spanish-speaking countries of the world. Yeah, and then we'll take a closer look at some interesting facts about some of the Spanish-speaking countries that we're learning about. Pero vamos a empezar con nuestra canción de saludos. Canten conmigo. Hola, buenos días. ¿Cómo están ustedes? ¿Cómo se sienten? Yo me siento bien. Good job. Remember, I told you at the beginning of the year that you'd be getting pretty familiar with that song. I bet you are by now. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead now and look at the countries that we've been talking about where Spanish is spoken. Now, the first country that I'd like to talk about is this one, where the language comes from, and certainly the name of the language, Spain in English, and we call the language Spanish. In Spanish, they call the country España. España. That's right. And remember that in España, they don't call the language Español. They call it Castilian, Castellano. That's because Spain has many different languages that they speak, and one of those is Castellano. Yeah. The next country that we looked at is a country where there are more Spanish speakers than anywhere else in the world, and that is Mexico. Mexico. Mexico is just to the south of the United States. And in fact, if you look, here's where Texas would be, New Mexico, Arizona, California. Many of you may have taken vacations down to Mexico. It's a great place, and you gotta speak Spanish to get around down there. Now, after Spain and Mexico, we looked at the countries of Central America, starting off with this country, which is, here it is, Guatemala. Guatemala is just south of Mexico, which will be found right over here. So, Guatemala, and they have beautiful cloths and great people down there. After Guatemala, we talked about this country here, which is Belize. We call it Belize in English. Belize. And remember we said that Belize, the official language, is actually English. But since it's surrounded by Spanish-speaking countries, and it's not very big, they mostly speak Spanish there. After Belize, we talked about El Salvador. And remember we said that El Salvador translates into the Savior. Yeah, El Salvador. There were a lot of Catholics that came into this part of the world, and a lot of the names are based on Catholics, like San Francisco, San Diego, all of those things. And El Salvador reflects that heritage. We also talked about this country, which is Honduras. Honduras, and remember the H is silent, so you don't call it Honduras in Spanish, you call it Honduras. Yeah. After that, we talked about Nicaragua. And now, if you're following along on your maps in your classroom, you may notice that here, there are a couple of big lakes in Nicaragua. And that's because all through here, there are mountain ranges that rise up in between the two coasts. And in there, you find some big, big lakes. Yeah. After Nicaragua, we talked about Costa Rica. Do you remember what Costa Rica means? Costa Rica means rich coast. Yeah. And it's very nice. They have this coast, which is here on the Caribbean Sea, and then this one, which goes out towards the Pacific Ocean. So it's a beautiful area along here. As a matter of fact, this is where North America starts to thin out. They say that along here is where Balboa discovered that there were actually two oceans. Have you heard that story? Next is this country, which is Panama. And now listen that we have the accent there on the end, Panama. Okay, we're going to be talking a little bit about Panama in just a few minutes, but you may already know some things about it. You may even know someone who's been there. Well, after the countries here in Central America, we talked about these up here in the Caribbean, starting off with this one, which is Cuba. Cuba, and you probably heard of Cuba before. If you follow this arrow here and you keep looking up there, you're going to find Florida. Florida is very close to the country of Cuba. Yeah, it's only a matter of a few miles, tens of miles. but it's very close, so you may have heard of Cuba. After Cuba, we talked about this country here, which is called La República Dominicana. There it is. La República Dominicana, which we call the Dominican Republic. And it's located here on this island. The other half of the island is a country called Haiti, Haití in Spanish. And in Haiti, they speak French. So think about this. On this one island right here, they have French speakers and Spanish speakers living side by side. Yeah. Now after República Dominicana, we talked about Puerto Rico. And there's Puerto Rico right over there. And do you remember what we said about Puerto Rico? Is it a country by itself? No, it's not really its own country, is it? We're going to talk about Puerto Rico when we talk about some of the interesting facts. But in Puerto Rico, they speak Spanish. Now, after looking at the countries here in Central America and the Caribbean, we started to look at the countries in the South American continent. And the first one that we looked at was right up here, and that is Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is an oil-rich country. That means they have a lot of oil wells over here in the Caribbean Sea, just off of there. Now, they also produce a lot of television shows that are shown all over the Spanish-speaking world, up into Mexico and the Caribbean islands in Central America, and certainly here in South America. And each country has a little bit different way that they speak Spanish, kind of like people in Australia speak English different from people in the United States, and they speak different from people who live in England. Well, South American countries have their different accents too. So when we used to watch the soap operas from Venezuela, we could always tell where they're from by the way they spoke. The next country that we looked at is this one right up here, and that is Colombia. And now Colombia has great coffee. They have great coffee, and that's grown in the mountains because all along here, all along this part, all the way down to here, are the Andes Mountains. And those are very, very high mountains that are pretty much snow-covered all year long. So up in the mountains of Colombia, they grow some great coffee. That's Colombia. The next country here is Ecuador. And remember, Ecuador is the same word that we use for equator. And the reason is because right through this country, right there, runs that imaginary line that divides the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere. Yeah, the equator runs right through Ecuador. So part of the time they have winter down here and summer up here, summer down here and winter up here. But actually, since they're so close to the equator, they pretty much have a consistent climate all year long. But if you go up into the mountains, because you're getting up in elevation, it gets much colder. People have frozen in Ecuador, even though it's right on the equator, because they've gone up so high into the mountains. The next country is this one here, Peru. Peru was the home to the Inca Indians of South America. Now, during the time that the Incas were a thriving civilization, there was only one person who was called Inca, and that was the head person. But now, we refer to all of those people who lived during that time as Incas. Yeah, and that's in Peru. Over here is Bolivia. In Bolivia is located, part of it is right along here. This part is in the mountains, the Andes Mountains. Okay? And then this part over here towards the east is down in the plains of South America, so it's much flatter. So you get a lot of diversity in the terrains there in Bolivia. Now, after Bolivia, we talked about Chile. And Chile is this long one all along the coast here. Part of Chile has the Atacama Desert. The Atacama Desert is so dry that they've never measured any rainfall at all there. Never any. You may get grapes from Chile in the winter. Next winter, when you go to the store, look at the grapes that you buy and see if it says grown in Chile. After Chile, we talked about Paraguay. Paraguay is a fine country. As I mentioned, they speak an indigenous language also called Guarani. And instead of saying hola, they say Baeshapa. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? After Paraguay, we talked about Argentina. Argentina is a very continental country. They have a lot of things. They're not like other countries. And Argentinians will tell you that they produce apples, they make clothes and shoes and all sorts of things. It's a very advanced country. Finally, we talked about Uruguay. And Uruguay is the smallest country there that you can see. The capital is Montevideo. But they're also very advanced, very good speakers of Spanish. Ahora, pueden repasar otra vez con este video. Presten atención todos.
Los países hispanohablantes. España. México. Cuba. República Dominicana. Guatemala. Honduras. Nicaragua. El Salvador. Costa Rica. Panamá. Venezuela. Colombia. Ecuador. Perú. Bolivia. Paraguay. Chile. Argentina. Uruguay.
Well, I tell you what, let's take a moment to talk about some interesting facts about Spanish-speaking countries. Okay, now, as you probably already know, señor means Mr., like I'm Señor Morris. Yeah. Well, señora is Mrs., or a woman who's married, right? Señora. And señorita is Miss, or a woman who is not married. Okay, so señor, señora, señorita. But in Spanish, they don't have a word that is the same as our word Ms. Okay? Now, because of cultural differences, men and women are regarded differently in many Spanish-speaking countries. However, recently in Spain, a woman has begun to be seen in an area where women have never before been found, the bullfight arena. Because the Spanish language reflects gender, remember, director, directora, meaning you can tell if a person is a man or a woman by the word used. Well, now, since there's a woman in an area where before there haven't ever been any, that means they have to find some new words to use to talk about her. So matador is a bullfighter. They have to call her, I guess, a matadora. Yeah, new word. Well, here's a question. ¿En qué continente está Paraguay? ¿En qué continente? There it is, in América del Sur. Did you know that Paraguay is the only country in the world to have two sides to its flag? The symbol in the center of the flag is different from one side to the other. See if you can find both symbols. How about this one? ¿En qué continente está Panamá? There it is. Actually, that's in América del Norte, North America. Did you know that Panama has a long canal carved through it called the Panama Canal? And through this canal, ships can save weeks of time going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean or vice versa. And they have a palindrome about the Panama Canal. It says, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. And if you read it backwards, it says, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. That's a palindrome. Okay, how about this one? ¿En qué continente están Perú, Bolivia y Argentina? Do you know that one? Están en América del Sur. Now, Peru was home to the Incas. And they were masters of agriculture, and they cultivated more than 3,000 different varieties of potatoes. Yeah. Bolivia has two national capitals. One is La Paz, up in the Andes Mountains, and the other is Sucre. How about this? The southern tip of Argentina, near to the continent of Antarctica, is called Tierra del Fuego, which means land of fire. And it's called this because when the first explorers sailed past this freezing part of the continent, they could see a lot of bonfires on the shores, started by natives living there to keep warm. How about this? ¿En qué continente están El Salvador y Honduras? That's right, they're in América del Norte. Central America is part of América del Norte. Now, did you know that these two countries once went to war over the results of a soccer game played by participants of the two countries? Ah. And finally, ¿en qué continente está Puerto Rico? It's right up there. Well, that's América del Norte. Puerto Rico is officially a self-governing commonwealth of the USA. That means that Puerto Ricans use dollars as their currency. They're citizens of the USA, and they can serve in the armed forces. But they can't vote in national elections like for the president, and they don't pay any federal income tax. Let's go ahead and look at our activity sheet for today. It's called Los Países Hispanoparlantes. Okay, go ahead and start off. Don't forget to put your name up at the top. This one's pretty easy. I kind of like it, though. It says, use a map of the world. So find a map and then answer the questions below. And you're going to say América del Sur, Europa, or América del Norte. Here are the different countries that we've been talking about, right? Well, all you have to do today is answer the question, ¿En qué continente están México y los países de América Central? So you just have to say what continent they're in. ¿Y en qué continente están Colombia y Venezuela? Yeah, so that's pretty easy. I think you guys can figure that out. Today, we reviewed the Spanish-speaking countries of the world that we've been studying during this unit. And we discussed some facts about some of the countries. Now, next class, we'll review all of the things that we've looked at during this unit in preparation for the evaluation. And we're going to play lotería, so you'll probably want to have your lotería boards ready to go. Pero ¿saben qué? Ya es hora de despedirnos. For our goodbye song today, let's sing La Bamba. Canten conmigo. Para bailar la bamba, para bailar la bamba, se necesita una poca de gracia, una poca de gracia pa' ti, pa' mí, ahí arriba y arriba, ahí arriba y arriba, por ti seré, por ti seré, por ti seré. Help me out now. Bamba, 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 bamba. Yo no soy marinero, yo no soy marinero, soy capitán, soy capitán, soy capitán. Bamba, 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 bamba. Good job. I'll see y'all next class. Until then, adiós y hasta luego.